Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to Eve Talk. This is an Eve Talk special because in today's video I want to talk about short selling. There's actually a topic that I touched upon in the latest Eve Talk, and some of you guys actually said that you would like to hear a video with my opinions on that. And now obviously when we're talking about short selling, we're not just talking about Eve Online. In fact, it's very difficult to do something like that in Eve Online, but we are talking about GameStop and the subreddit Wall Street Bets and everything that's been going on with that situation. And so I do feel like I should put out this little disclaimer before I get going. I am not a financial expert, and this video should not be seen as financial advice, and it should also not be seen as an accusation towards anyone, because I don't have all the facts, and honestly, as is almost always the case, things are probably a lot more gray than any of the two sides of the argument wants to let out. So that being said, let's get started with what is short selling. And I would say that short selling is basically gambling on something losing value. In the simplest terms, that would be what this is and how would this work. Now perhaps before I go with how would this work, I do think that right away you do feel that this is something that almost any professional in any field will encounter at some point, and is actually a risk for them. It is that lots of professionals will lose touch with the general perception of what they're doing. And so right away, short selling is trying to profit off of the decline of something. It has a negative connotation to most people. I do think that this will be seen as a negative. In the case of GameStop, it is quite often seen as trying to dance on the grave of a dead company, trying to basically squeeze out all the money that you can from a company that's failing, from people losing their jobs. And so from that perspective, it is a very bad thing. But I am also going to give you guys the other side of that equation. You can just look at a movie. Sure, a movie is fictional. It's called The Big Short. It's actually an amazing movie that shows the potential good side of shorting, you could say, where it actually tries to point out problems in an industry, illegal behavior, super greedy behavior, super risky behavior. And so the argument that short selling is actually a mechanic within a free market that helps to correct problems is true as well. But of course, not everyone does short selling because they have found illegal activity in a company, for instance, or somebody cheating on the books or something like that, right? That's when you can see, all right, someone is actually lying to everyone about how their company is doing. We're gonna short that to show and then to really try and put a megaphone on that illegal activity. So that would be the positive way to use short selling. So exactly how does that work? In short, you think that something is going down in value, but you don't own it. So what you're going to do is you're going to borrow it from someone that does own it. You pay them a fee, probably an interest rate or something like that. And then later down the line, if you're right and the value of that stuff has gone down, you buy it and give it back to the person you borrowed it from. And then of course, the difference minus that interest that you're paying to the person you borrowed from is gonna be your profit. That is how you would profit from a decline. Now, a second question right away is, of course, can you do short selling in Eve Online? Eve Online is a sandbox, right? It's got this awesome player-driven economy. So is that possible? The answer is that in theory it is possible, but first of all, we would have to find an item that has similar characteristics to something in the real world. And basically the first item that comes to mind would be the Gecko. The Gecko is a drone that has a very specific characteristic in that it cannot be produced in the game. There is a limited supply of that, and the reason for that is that CCP, or the reason that it exists, is that CCP from time to time gives it out as a reward for special events. But for sake of the argument here, we're going to say that there's a limited number of geckos on the market and available throughout the entire universe, and that is never going to change. Now, if for some reason a player would look at the gecko and say that one is going to go down in value, which happens, you can see here we went from 180 million ISK down to 100 million ISK in not that much time, which was actually the introduction of more geckos into the game in a special event here in early April last year. And so perhaps the player wants to anticipate on that, or he may have other reasons. A Tech 2 version is coming out, it's actually crap, there's illegal stuff behind it, right? There's many ways to try and justify your thinking that this stuff is going to go down in price. And as a result, he wants to short geckos. Now in EVE Online, what you would have to do is you would actually have to find a player that owns geckos and ask them, can I borrow these 100 geckos, let's say, from you? I'm going to pay you some ISK in order to, to make sure that you win out on that as well. And then let's say that you borrow 100 of these geckos from a player when they're worth 180 million ISK. Now, again, here within EVE Online, right, there's no such thing as the rule of law, and we all know that if you give the geckos to someone, there is zero guarantee or obligation for them to give them back. So this is 100% based on trust, and in the real world there is still something as the rule of law that makes it more likely that that borrowing would actually happen. But let's, for the sake of the argument, say that the trust is there and that the player that wants to short geckos manages to borrow 100 of them when they're worth 180 million, and then of course he waits a couple months, they're worth 100 million, he buys his 100 geckos from the market, gives them back to the player, and there we go, he's made a profit of 80 million on the decline of an asset. So in theory it is absolutely possible to do a short sale in EVE Online. It's just super unlikely because that when he actually buys them at 100 million ISK, he has zero obligations in EVE to give them back. This is really the Wild West. This is true unbridled capitalism without the rule of law in EVE Online, which is part of the beauty of this game as well, because that means that short selling actually almost never happens, because it's super easy to actually make that borrowing happening. Now, from this story so far, everything still looks fine, right? He was right. This was actually worth less than it was a couple of months ago. He shorted it, he made some money. There's no real problem. What is the actual crux of the problem is what happened with GameStop, that somehow they've managed to do short selling on 140% of what's available. Now, I needed a little bit of time to think about that as well. How the hell is something like that possible? But with my Gecko example, there's actually a very easy way, I think, to demonstrate that. Let's say that you've managed to borrow 100 geckos, sell them on the market, and that's your short position. But let's also assume that there's only 100 geckos that exist in the game at this point. Well, what's to stop you from contacting the player that you just sold them to and borrowing them from that player again, and then putting them back on the market, selling them to a third person, and there we go, we actually have shorted 200% of the available geckos on the market. This is of course crazy talk. The risk in that is just unbelievable that someone would actually choose to do that. But it is in theory absolutely possible. Of course, you can short 200% or more than 100% of something just by finding someone else to re-borrow it from that doesn't know that what he owns is actually still borrowed and owed to someone else. So that brings me then to the story that I'm gonna tell here, the Big Short scheme. Let's try to put all of that together and try to explain this. So we are going to assume that all of a sudden in EVE Online, CCP would come out with a feature that allows for shorting stuff in EVE Online. So basically you would have a window where you could borrow stuff from other players, pay them a fee, let's say 1% just for sake of the argument, and then or a fee that you of course agree upon between two parties, but let's say 1%, and then like a certain amount of time later you have to give those goods back. Now, we are EVE Online players, and if CCP would announce a feature like that, we would meta game that to hell and back, and we would look for the perfect scheme to take full advantage of this crazy feature. And here is, I think, how we would do that. And for that, we are going to log in a first character, and we're gonna call this guy Melvin. So this is the pilot Melvin, and CCP has just launched the short selling feature into the game. What would Melvin do? Well, he would go to the market and he would start browsing that, and eventually he would come across something like, whoops, spoilers, that's actually not the beginning of the story, it's right here. He would find something like the Morphite chart, and let's call it GameStonk, just to make it very clear what's happening here. Melvin wants to short GameStonk because up here it is trading at, well, I just want to keep it very simple with the numbers, so let's say that it's trading at $50 a share, and there's only 100 shares of Melvin out there, but of GameStonk out there, sorry. But Melvin, he says, I'm gonna short that crap and I'm going to make a lot of ISK. I'm basically the smarter cousin of a character from The Big Short, and I'm gonna make so much money, and at the same time I can feel really righteous about that because GameStonk is crap and I'm punishing that company by doing my short. So honestly, the rationalization behind shorting is not that difficult to do. So what does Melvin do? He finds the 100 players that own 100 GameStonks, and he says, hello there, I'm Melvin, I'm an amazing stockbroker, and have I got a deal for you. I want to borrow your GameStonk, and I'm gonna pay you 1% to be able to borrow that. I'm gonna work my magic, it's gonna be great, everyone will be happy. You're getting a return at something that is obviously peaking at the moment in the market. Just look at that chart. And he managed to do that. He gets all 100 GameStonks borrowed to him. He pays the 1% fee, and of course he sells that to the market for, well, between $45 and $50 a piece, because of course all of that selling is putting a little bit of pressure on the price. And so far we're still in that regular story. Someone shorted something that he thinks go down, and considering this chart, that may still be absolutely acceptable and possible, but we are EVE Online players, and this is a scheme. We're going to push this to its absolute limit. And so Melvin actually decides to call a friend, or as EVE Online players know it, log in an alt account, and this alt account is called Popular Melvin. Now you can see why. He's flying a much bigger ship. This guy is actually a big voice in the trading community, and so what Popular Melvin decides to do is he goes on CNBC, he goes on talking in stations, he goes to all his social media, and he starts to talk absolute crap about GameStonk. He says it's a terrible company, it's virtually bankrupt, this stock can only go down. In fact, and here we're going to of course go into the territory, alright, this is pure speculation, but I just want to make the example very extreme here. In fact, I've heard from someone who's heard from someone that what they're doing there is borderline illegal, and I've heard from my Mexican cousin that it's full of white alt-right supremacists in GameStonk as well. This is just terrible, worst company ever. This stock can only go down. Sell, 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 and it's starting to work. GameStonk goes from around $45 to $40, and then of course the game is on because Melvin logs in yet another account. Here comes Melvin02, and Melvin02 somehow gets a list of 100 players that have just bought GameStonk and are already looking at losses. So he opens up his market browser, goes back here and start calling these people up as well, and he says, hi there, I'm Melvin02. I'm an amazing stockbroker, and have I got a deal for you. I want to borrow your GameStonk, and I'm gonna pay you a 1% fee for that. I'm gonna work my magic, it's gonna be great for everyone. He manages to convince them again. He has the 100 GameStonks, puts them back on the market, this time for $40. And of course, I think you can see where I'm going with this. Next up, he logs in Melvin03, does the exact same thing, sells it for $30, and by the time his is at Melvin06. The game stock is worth $0, and he has made $5,000 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus $1,000. Just everyone else is wiped out. You've got 500 very, very angry people in there, and you know, that's like the scheme to its absolute extreme, where you just keep doubling down. In this scenario, we've shorted 500% of the available stock, and we have fully succeeded. No one is the wiser. Price is zero. We're just walking away with every single bit of value that exists in the stock. Now, both in real life and in EVE Online, of course, the market would sort of notice what's happening and do a counter move, and that's exactly what this second chart of Morphyte could kind of exemplify. You could say that an alliance in the game called JitaBets notices what Melvin is doing, and they're saying, you know what we're gonna do? We're going to start to buy all of that game stock, and we're going to drive the price up. Now, in EVE Online, again, no rule of law. So here, those guys that manage to trade and drive up the price are gonna make some ISK. Melvin, he's long gone. He's got all the ISK, and everyone would be laughing at the 500 people that were dumb enough to borrow their game stock in EVE Online to a player, and we would actually congratulate Melvin for pulling off an amazing scam that in the real world would of course be absolutely illegal. We would hope. That's still actually up for debate a little bit, because it's not 500%, it's not that blatant, but with GameStop, from what I've heard, we're talking 120 to 140% of the available stocks having been shorted. That's just not normal in my personal book, and that is why, of course, the guys from Wall Street Bets noticed that and decided we are going to buy GameStop shares with diamond hands. We're going to hold, and we are going to drive the price up. Now, this is not only their buying, of course, it's all of that gambling done by Melvin, who now has to buy these stocks in order to give 100 to him, 100 to that player, 100 to those players, and he just can't do it. It is going to cost him billions and billions of dollars. In this case, in EVE Online, it's actually a complete impossibility, because you just don't have enough stuff on the market available. You'd have to buy out those 4 doubling down parties where you did the ones after the initial one. And so that is, in my opinion, really the crux of what's happening at the moment, is that those hedge funds have gone so greedy and so risky that they went above 100% of what could be shorted, and now they are massively paying the price for that. So with that, you know, I think this is from the sidelines. You know, again, I am going to put that disclaimer here again. I'm not a financial expert. It's not financial advice, and this is certainly not an accusation towards anyone, although it may sound like that a little bit. I will fully admit that I don't know anyone who owns GameStop, and I don't know anyone who shorts GameStop. So for my money, it's entirely possible that a lot of the manipulation is actually happening on the subreddit, where people are trying to drive the price up in order to take advantage of gullible people that are still buying at these, well, relatively ridiculous prices for GameStop, but in all likeliness, it's gonna be a little bit of a gray area where there's wrongdoings on both sides, people taking advantage of the system on both sides, which is you know, very unfortunate, but it's part of human nature, and that really comes down to what this is all about, right? To me, following this story is no longer about making money in the market. It's not about is shorting good or bad. It's actually about the rule of law and how the politicians and the industry, the financial industry itself, is going to handle this situation. Will they make sure that you know, it's a fair system where everyone has the same rules and the same chance, or, and unfortunately 2008 kind of show that, are they going to make the little guy pay for the exuberance and the risks taken by bigger players, which in my opinion is what happened here, right? This is not like a sort of illegal activity done by the subreddit. No, this all started with these hedge funds really taking bets with the incredible potential risk of infinity, because the price of whatever they were shorting can potentially go as high as the market is willing to pay for that. And then people on the subreddit noticing that and you know, taking advantage within the free market rules of that mistake that those hedge funds have made. I find it an absolutely fascinating story myself, and from an EVE Online perspective, honestly, it is pretty cool to consider and to talk about. And so I do kind of feel that being active in this sandbox game helps me to understand what's happening with that short selling Wall Street Bets GameStop situation in the real world, and I kind of wanted to share that with you guys. I hope that it was interesting. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.